Hello, Lana. I hope you're well today. I'm happy to see you again. I take this opportunity to welcome you to today's lesson. Today is lesson number 10, under the topic, composition, appointment, and the duties of directors. In this lesson, we'll take the 4 remaining items under this topic. The specific items include 1. Directors as agents of shareholders. Directors as agents of shareholders. We'll also look at directors' liabilities. Directors' liabilities and insurance indemnity. The third item that we'll be considering is conflicts of interest and disclosure. And the last item is the code of good boardroom practice. Boardroom practice. We'll kick off our lesson by looking at the first item, which is directors as agents. As agents of the shareholders. Here, we're seeking to understand the place of the directors in the company and who they are. This is informed by the fact that the company is an artificial entity, and for that reason, it cannot act on its own initiative. It must act through some human agency. Please remember that the shareholders who are owners of the companies are scattered over a wide area, and hence it is not possible for them to take an active role or part in the day-to-day management of the company. The owners of the company, therefore, who are the shareholders, elect from amongst themselves some persons who are good in management as their representatives to manage the day-to-day affairs of the company. And the persons representatives elected by the shareholders to manage the direct day-to-day activities of the company are normally known as directors, or are collectively known as the board of directors, or simply the board. Since the company is an artificial person, as we've just said, it enters into contracts with third parties through its agents, who are simply the directors. The directors of the company, therefore, have a principal-agent relationship with the shareholders, the directors being the agent. The directors as agents of the company have certain powers and duties to carry out the business of the company, subject to restrictions imposed by the Articles of Association as well as the Companies Act. They can make contracts on behalf of the company and are not personally liable, provided they do not exceed the powers conferred to them. As agents, they must act in the interest of the company and must not abuse their position. The directors as agents are also liable to be indemnified for negligent actions falling within the scope of the authority. So simply put, the directors are the means through which a company conducts its business, and they represent the owners of the company who are the shareholders. They have powers conferred on them by the Articles of Association as well as the Companies Act. And we say that in their position as agents, the principals, they are not liable. They are not personally liable, provided they do not exceed the powers conferred on them. And equally, they have a right to be indemnified for negligence or negligent actions falling within the scope of their authority. Now, we're introducing the subject of a director's liability, and we're saying that they cannot be personally liable as long as they act in accordance or within the scope of their authority. This takes us to our next item of discussion, which is directors' liabilities and insurance indemnity. Under what circumstances are directors likely going to be held liable for the actions? Or how are they going to, when are they going to be liable while performing their role as directors or agents of the company? So, item number 2 is directors' liabilities and insurance indemnity. Liabilities and insurance indemnity. We just stated that as agents of the company, the directors cannot be personally liable as long as they act within the scope of the authority. But it turns out that under certain circumstances, directors can be held liable. While acting as an agent, the director acts on behalf of the company and the shareholders. To a certain extent, they will not be liable for any wrongs or negligent actions, provided they are within the scope of the authority. And this introduces the subject of indemnification and insurance. For a company to be able to attract directors of a good caliber, it needs to have in place a policy of indemnifying directors for liabilities suffered in the course of executing their job as directors. What is a liability? We will define a liability as the responsibility of consequences, the responsibility of consequences, consequence arising out of conduct failing to meet some predetermined standards. Consequences is damage or loss by someone. A person, by being so responsible, ends up being required to pay some financial compensation for such failure of conduct. In the course of their work as directors, the agents of the company might, at times, fail to meet a certain predetermined conduct and thereby be liable. Liability arises in three situations. Liability will arises in three situations. The first situation is when a law or statute is broken. Directors are required to abide by the law while performing their job. And in the event a director breaks a law, then they become liable. The consequences of breaking a law include paying a fine, imprisonment, restriction to one's rights or privileges, and statutory obligations directors are likely going to violate will include 1. Appointment and election of directors. The law sets out the process of appointing directors. Any violation or non-observance of that law will amount to a breach of law. Another one is on calling meetings. Remember, again, under Companies Act, the procedure for calling meetings of the company is expressly provided for. 3, paying of taxes. A company has a legal obligation to pay taxes when due. Again, keeping minutes of the meetings of the company. And 4, reporting and disclosing prescribed information. All these are statutory obligations which directors must comply with. The second situation under which a conflict liability might arise is when a contract is breached or violated. When a contract is breached or violated. A contract is simply a legally binding agreement between two or more parties, giving rise to rights and obligations to all the parties involved.